Well, hi everybody, and welcome back. We're on to Unit 5. We're still kind of in the administrative phase of investigations, and I know that everybody's probably rolling their eyes saying, oh my gosh, are we never going to get into the really cool and fun stuff? And we are. In fact, next week, I think we talk about eyewitness reliability, and that will take us into interviewing techniques for witnesses. Then we go on to cool tools, which is really gathering artifacts and other evidence and some of the sources you can use for evidence. So, it's getting there, but if you don't know how to build an investigation and you don't know how to record the investigation, you could do all kinds of cool work, but you're going to fall flat on your face because decision makers are going to say, you don't have anything I can really use reliably to make a decision on the fate of my subject, right? So you can build a case and, catch somebody dead to rights doing something, but they're probably not going to leave the workplace. Or in the case of a criminal investigation, you're not going to be able to take it to the police without having something to hand to them. And so these administrative things are really important in that if you build your case correctly and you document your case correctly, your matter correctly as you go along, you're going to be way ahead of the game. So that's why we're spending so much time on this and getting this footing, right? But before we get into this, because this week we're kind of a mishmash of things, right? A couple of things I want to talk about. I also want to share with you an investigative matter that I'm working on right now and how it falls into investigative plans. But before we start talking about the investigative report itself, let's recap a little bit on investigative plans, because I saw some things in the discussions that, although not wrong, may jam you up a little bit. And again, I'll give you an example of why I say that. So the investigative plans that you submitted for your discussions last week, they varied a lot. Not so much in substance as in format, right? Some people did it exactly as I did. They did a statement and then sub-statements and then questions perhaps coming from the sub-statements and then a list of sources they would get the information to answer those questions from so that they had the roadmap to follow. Others simply went to, when, where, and if they said where, they started asking questions. Where was this person? Where was Mr. Brown? Where was Miss Kelly? Where is the office? And that's okay. Look, when you get out into the field, Dr. Wisniewski is not going to be looking over your shoulder saying, hey, you didn't put a statement there, right? This is really stuff that's on you. And frankly, in most workplaces, you will be the only one in your specialty. Most workplaces don't have lots and lots of security people who do investigations. There's normally one person at a location that will do an investigation. So there's not going to be somebody to say you're doing that wrong, right? So you kind of got to get it right yourself. And if you have certain, tweaks that you want to make to that method, I'm not going to stop you. But I do want to make sure that you understand there's some danger in just listing questions, okay? Without stating a goal and just going to questions, sometimes your questions get off the mark. And you may not be getting the right things. You may not be getting the right evidence. You might be overreaching, and overreaching has a danger in and of itself. So if we go back to our case of Mr. Kelly potentially having inappropriate conduct directed toward Miss Brown in the bank, right, on July 4th, 2020. By the way, banks aren't open on July 4th. And if you didn't catch that, then start to think a little bit about your investigative mind. But when you ask about when, you may simply, if you just list questions, well, when did this take place? What time did Mr. Kelly come to work? What time did Miss Brown come to work? What time did Mr. Kelly leave that day? What time did Miss Brown leave that day? Those are all reasonable questions for a when, right? They all will determine a time. But are they targeted enough to what you need to know? Without stating what you need to know, those questions may not make much sense. And let me show you why. When I take the extra steps to say what I need to support the investigation, what I must prove, in this case, my statement is I have to show that Mr. Kelly and Miss Brown were both present in the bank at 11:30 on 7/4/20. Now, if I look at and I also must show that Miss Brown departed the bank soon after 11:30. If you remember correctly in her initial statement, she left right after the incident and has not returned to work. And I need to show that, if nothing else, it may not directly impact whether or not Mr. Kelly's conduct was inappropriate, but it does show the veracity of Miss Brown as to whether or not her account is credible and whether or not she told us everything she needs to tell us, right? So if I look at the list of questions that we started with, the time that Mr. Kelly came to work has no bearing on whether or not they were both in the bank at 11:30. He could have come in at 10. He could have come in at 9. I don't need to know that. I need to know that he was there at 11:30. So what time they came to work that day, unless it impacts that 11:30 time frame, is really not material. I need to know when Miss Brown left, because she told me in a statement that she left at 11:30, or that slightly after the incident. And I need to show that where they were, and that they were both present in the bank at 11:30, which means I only need to look at records that show that time frame of, say, 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. I don't need to know too much. Sometimes knowing too much is a problem. So statement first tells you specifically what has to be proven or supported. I don't need to prove that Mr. Kelly came in at 8 or 8:15. I'm not interested in whether or not he was on time for work that day. That would have no bearing on the matter that I'm investigating. Only that he was there at 11:30 when Ms. Brown alleges that he acted inappropriately. So my questions then match my need if I have a statement that says exactly what I must show. Keeps me from gathering too much or unnecessary data, and it limits a subject's excuses. If you present too much data to a subject when you get to the interview of the subject, which we'll be talking about interviews coming up in about 2 weeks, but if you give them too much data, you open the door for error and you lose some credibility yourself in that interview. And I'm going to give you a great example of how that could have happened to me, and I didn't let it. So currently I am working with employee relations and human resources and occupational health in my organization on a workplace violence incident. There were threatening statements made by an employee to a third party about others in the workplace, about his bosses. And it's alleged that on a certain date, the subject, I won't give you the name of course, made statements to third parties that he'd punch his boss in the face next time he had the chance. And the third party reported it back to Human Resources. Now, they do the initial investigation of gathering facts in this case because there was not an incident of actual violence, there was a threat. However, our workplace violence policy states that acts or threats of physical violence covered include threats, right? So, and it's also communicating a threat, and this was in Massachusetts, is a crime. So we have our what, right? We have a report, someone did something, we have a policy against it, and it's also a violation of law. And the Human Resources Department was the intake. They contacted me and we divvied the work. And that's not uncommon that you will do part of an investigation as part of an investigative team. And in my particular role in this, because I have training in the management of aggressive behavior, I was tasked with seeing whether this employee, who is now put on suspension, was capable of returning to work, whether there was an actual threat, right? Just because you say something doesn't mean it's a credible and reliable threat. I can tell you that I am sure your parents at one point have slapped their forehead and said, "Oh my God, I could kill that kid," when you've done something dumb. And I know that because I was young once and I did lots of dumb things. I'm sure my dad's forehead still had a mark on it where he was slapping his son. "Oh my God, this kid's going to kill me and I'm going to kill him." Now, my dad did not kill me, nor do I think he had the intent to kill me. He had plenty of opportunity. He didn't take it. And I'm sure that when I said that about my children, I still loved them and I wasn't going to kill them, but they just had me exasperated, right? Is it a credible threat? I would say that's not a credible threat. It was still an utterance, but not a credible threat. And there was certainly no intent to follow through, intent or actions to follow through. I did not then go and get my gun out of the nightstand and hunt down my children and, threaten to kill them, right? There was no follow through. In that case, then what we have is we have an utterance, we have inappropriate behavior, but we don't necessarily have the crime. We don't have the furtherance of the crime to the point of intent, right? So my job was to interview this individual to determine what his intent was and whether or not this was a credible threat with potential follow-through or simply an utterance. So in this case, it's one of those rare occurrences that I talked about where you probably want to find out the why, right? What was the motivation here? Because that has a lot to do with the credibility. So to support the investigation, I determined I had to show whether the threats were made with clear intent or just in a figurative way. Again, was this just an utterance of frustration that was inappropriate, that should have never happened, and requires some interaction with the company to correct the behavior? Or was it a real threat, and we've got a guy who is going to go off in the workplace, potentially punch somebody, and I don't want him back. I also had to show whether the subject was capable and had shown an intent to follow through on his threats. So was there anything previous in his history that showed that he has violent tendencies, he's made other threats that he has followed through on before, or attempted to follow through on before? And that history would be very important to show that maybe this utterance wasn't a one-time lack of judgment and a stupid comment versus someone who was actually has the capability, the intent, and the history of following through on such threats. So that was one key thing that I had to understand was there a history? So now I'm going to follow through on that. To show whether the threats were made with clear intent or in a figurative way, I need to understand, has the subject made similar statements in the past and there wasn't an incident, right? I mean, for those of you who are fans of old black and white TV, the Honeymooners, Ralph Cramden used to say, "To the moon, Alice," and he put his fist up, but I don't think we ever saw an episode where the guy, took a hook and connected, right? It was, and then quite frankly, in poor taste now, in retrospect, obviously people laughed about that, right? But there was never an incident. It was a statement that was made. And sometimes people have things in their vocabulary that they say that they really don't mean it in that way, So we needed to understand that. An employee record would tell me if he makes statements like that. Have he ever been written up? Have he ever been counseled for making statements in the workplace that were inappropriate like that? And that was something I had access to, so that was an easy artifact to look through. On the other one, show whether the subject is capable and shown intent to follow through. Now I needed to understand previous history. And for that, I needed some criminal history. I needed potentially some previous employer history if I could get it, or at least access to references that he may have brought in, so I could see if there was anything there that looked like it was a firing, right? Criminal history, as you know, is hard to come by as a corporate investigator. We talked about that. But I was able to find some things that brought his possible intent into light. So employee record showed no previous write-ups, counseling, anything about inappropriate comments in the workplace, inappropriate threats, if you will. Nothing in his past with us. I did a limited open source check on him for criminal record. Now you have to understand these decisions are ones that are made very quickly. This is one of those investigations where someone is on suspension and you need to determine whether they come back to work or not. They could be a worker who's necessary to get a job done. They could be the only one that has the skill set to do a particular job, so they may be important to the company. That can't rush your decision without all the facts, but it certainly will rush you to get all the facts, right? And it just so happened the employee worked in Massachusetts but lived in New Hampshire. We have a couple of facilities in Massachusetts, and the Northeast is pretty crowded, as you know. You can live in southern New Hampshire and work in the northern part of Massachusetts pretty easily, right? So he lived in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is an interesting state, as New York was when I was growing up there, where convictions, in order to get somebody's conviction record, you have to send in money, you have to send in a statement, it has to be by mail. It takes about a month, really, to get anything. It's almost like a Freedom of Information request with a longer time frame on it. But when someone's arrested, their name can go in the local newspaper. So that's kind of interesting because arrests can't be held against you, but convictions can. But it's easier to get arrest info if your name was in the paper than it is to get conviction info by official sources. So in this particular case, I was able to do an open source check and found that he had 2 arrests. One was for a violation of domestic order, and both arrests were in New Hampshire, Massachusetts border towns. The person had a rather unique name, not really unique, but enough that it wasn't a John Smith kind of name, right? I was 100% confident in his identity, and there was also in the domestic order a listing of his spouse in this newspaper article, who I was able to go confirm matched the first name, middle initial. They didn't have the maiden name, but he was married to this person with the same first name, middle initial. So it was 100% confident in the match that I had a guy who had 2 arrests, and one of them was for a violation of a domestic order. Violation of a domestic order in New Hampshire meant that police had come to his house. They told him to remove himself from the house for a period of 12 or 24 hours. And then he violated that and went back to the home within that time frame, and they arrested him for violation of a domestic order. Don't need to have a court order in some places to make immediate peace. The peace officer in those states can say, you're not coming back here for 12 hours. I passed that order on to you. It is a legally binding one, and he violated that. And it was with his spouse. So he has a domestic problem, right, which is domestic violence. There was also a domestic order active in Ohio with the same name and the same age, same middle name and same age. Now, I was about 80% confident it's the same guy. The time frames matched up. He wasn't working in New Hampshire or Massachusetts during the time frame. I didn't show that he was in Ohio any other way, but I was about 80% confident. And when I interviewed him, it came up in the interview about the New Hampshire arrest, but I did not in any way go near the Ohio one. And let me tell you why. Because if you're not 100% sure, that too much data can haunt you. So as part of that interview process, I asked him about the situation. I had all witness statements already in front of me. I had other documents that I could refer to. But in the interview, basically asked him, he alluded to the fact that he'd never had any problems before like this. When he did that, he opened the door for me to ask, have you ever had any problems with any threatening behavior in the past where maybe the police have been involved? Because he told me he hadn't. He opened that door and I walked through it. And he started with, no, not that I can think of. And one of the investigative, interview techniques we'll talk about is silence. And I waited and waited and waited. And finally he came out with, well, I did have something back, a few years back in New Hampshire, to which I was able to say, are you talking about the incident in Nashua, New Hampshire, where you were arrested by the Amherst, New Hampshire police for violating a domestic order? Because I was 100% confident in that. I wanted him to know that I had that piece of information, that I'd done my homework. And he said, yes. I said, okay, all right, that's good. I'm glad you shared that with me. And then I gave him some silence again, and he said, well, there's more that I should probably tell you. I said, yes, okay. And he said, well, the police have been to my house a number of times over the last 2 months for domestic problems. I'm divorcing my wife, and we're having problems, and the police have been there a number of times. I said, okay, was anybody ever arrested or charged? No, they just tell us that, the noise complaint mostly, and I've been asked to leave, and I've left, and I haven't gone back, and that was great. I didn't bring up the Ohio, because if I did, and it wasn't him, then he had an opening. Well, if this guy doesn't know exactly who I am, maybe I don't need to talk about the cops coming to my house now. But by bringing up only the fact that I had 100% confidence in, that was the thing that tripped him up, right? When I was able to say yes and told him what towns it was in, and, asked about, domestic orders and mentioned his wife's first name, he was under the impression that I had everything about him in front of me anyway. So that's why he didn't hold back on the police. But he did not mention Ohio. And to this day, I still don't know if it's the same guy, and I don't care, quite frankly. I had enough. The history of violent acts, really precluded him coming back to work, right? There were other stressors in his life. In fact, he's getting a divorce. The COVID thing, there was some job loss in the family. I mean, there was a lot of stressors. He used the word stress, by the way, in the interview 20 times. In about a 40-minute interview, 20 times the word stress, stressor, or stressing came up relating to himself. And so he's still in limbo, and we'll have a threat response team. And I don't know if you discuss those in personnel security anymore or not, but that's a team of individuals from occupational health, HR, employment law, other places, a multifunctional team that gets together that discusses threats to make sure that we react to them all in the same way. It's a very common thing in industry. But bottom line, what I want you to take away from this is, because I went and was very specific about the questions that I wanted to ask, the things I needed to prove, I didn't go out on a limb with something that I didn't need. Because when you go out on a limb, sometimes it just shoots you down. That person that you were interviewing will see the weak spot, and they will exploit that. That's what people do, okay? So if you write the statement and you go to the exact questions you need and you only prove the things you need, you don't have those weak spots because you don't have that extra data that you don't need, could never use, and it only comes back to haunt you. That's the moral of the story, which I hope you enjoyed. And maybe before the end of the term, I'll be able to share with you how that turns out. But writing the statement keeps you from collecting too much information. It tells you what you need to prove, and then you write questions exactly what you need to prove. If you go straight to questions, they get too broad, you collect too much data, and you murky the water a little bit where you really don't have a clear and convincing case because there's things in there that could turn on you. So that's what you want to do. So we're 20 minutes in, but this week's topic is a relatively short one, but an important one, because a good investigative report really sets you apart from other investigators, and it will get you what you need in the end. When you go to decision makers with a sloppy report, you got a 50-50 shot of, no matter how tight your case is, of getting any action out of it, because they want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row, and showing that organization is key. A good investigative report is always super organized. It's short, focused narratives. Just the facts, no conjecture. Mr. Jones admitted that he stole the television set. I believe he did so to sell it because of his crack habit. I don't need to know that he had a crack habit. I don't need to know that he sold it for a crack habit or to buy, cancer medicine for his children. It doesn't matter to me. I only need to know that he stole the television. If he admitted that to me, that's it. No conjecture, only the facts, right? Just the facts, as Joe Friday would say in Dragnet. Short, focused, and no conjecture. You have supporting artifacts or evidence for anything that you have in there. You have to have something to support any statement in your narrative. Maybe it's an interview. In an interview, Mr. Jones told me that he stole the television. Or I have evidence Mr. Jones stole the television because I have video. I have some artifact. It always answers the what, the when, the where, the who, the how, and the why. The why, again, is optional. Sometimes you put it in. Sometimes you don't know why somebody did something, right? I mean, the example of school shooters, there's very seldom a why. That is simply a mental health issue or an issue of evil, no matter how you want to look at it, right? But your report can be summarized with the documents and artifacts that you retain, and it doesn't have any non-facts in it. It is simply that. A good, solid, organized, short, and to-the-point report is what you're looking for. So when you get to that first job, the chances are, as I said, there are very few security investigators in a company, even a big company. I mean, I have a company that I work for that has over 100,000 employees, and most of our investigators are brand protection. They're anti-counterfeiting investigators. When it comes to investigating employee matters, there's a handful of us. I mean, realistically, there are 5, right, that do this type of work on any regularity. So it's unlikely that there is a form and a format set up for you. You're not going to go to the form cabinet and grab out the corporate security investigation form for ABC company that has 500 or 1,000 employees. Guess what? That form is a blank sheet of paper. You're going to need to use something to build your own report. Unlike a police department where you do a police report, the first day on the job, say, okay, there's the police reports, just fill those out. They've got it all set for you. You don't necessarily have that, right? Another disadvantage. But we see security managers building their reports just like a police report. And oftentimes, if you're ex-military and you've done any military police work, you're doing the military format, which is the DD 1569. I must have done 1,000 of those, right? They're very canned, very straightforward, ask very specific questions, but they may not relate well to corporate world. There are canned incident reporting softwares, IRMS D3. There's a bunch of them out there, right? They're good, but they're very generic. And do you need the expense of that if you indeed are only doing maybe 1-2 investigations a month? Which, as a security manager, if you're doing 1 or 2 a month, you're doing a fair number of them, right? A mid-sized company doesn't have a lot of these investigations. That's why they're very hard to do, because people don't get practiced in them. But do you really want to go out and buy a canned software program for, I will tell you that D3, I just got a bid back from them on an update to their software at $11,000 for a year. Now that's not a lot of money in the scheme of things, but if you're only doing 2 investigations a month, right? That's 24 investigations. It's costing you $500 just for the software per investigation. That's incredible. Many of these models, though, like the police report and the military report, they collect a lot of personally identifiable information that you don't need to collect. I already know where the person lives if they work for my company. It's in payroll. I already know their social security number. That too is in payroll. I already know their driver's license number, most likely, or passport number. It's on their I-9 form. I have access to all that information. I'm not the single source of truth for identification on that person. I have that from other people. I don't need to collect it. And storing and sharing PII, personally identifiable information, in a corporate world opens you up to a lot of privacy laws. So let's take a quick look at a police report, and I can kind of show you what the differences might be. Okay, so we're looking at a agency report here, a case summary report. I believe this is Fredericksburg, Virginia, or Maryland, rather. And this is probably an actual report here, and Jonathan David Schultz here got himself into some trouble. And here's the charges. Now, in this case, this would be our what, right? Here it is, theft of other, embezzlement. Here's the statute number, right? Much like our what. This is what is alleged. This is the statute, the rule, the regulation, the law that was violated, right? Uniform crime. It's got all the information just like a what. So we're very similar there. Other persons involved, and we will have a list of witnesses. However, you'll notice here that they have address, home phone, date of birth, your name, your race, your gender, your date of birth, together constitute PII. And if there are pictures, that just constitutes more PII. Putting certain combinations of identifiable information together on a person is personally identifiable information that in the corporate world you must protect. In the police world, they've redacted it here, and they may redact it on police reports that you get from them if you go, buy a police report. But in some jurisdictions, that's not true. They don't redact it. I've gotten police reports with people's actual date of birth on it. Government has different regulations. You've probably heard, and I think maybe even this course I've discussed GDPR, the General Data Protection Requirements in Europe. If you violate the General Data Privacy Requirements, you can pay a fine up to, I think it is one time your last year's sales or profits or revenue in Europe as a fine. A company like I work for probably had, $20 billion in revenue. That would be a big fine for not protecting somebody's information and letting it get out. So my point being here is that when we look at this case summary, there's an awful lot of people listed and personal information, and you don't want to list that in your security report. You have that on people. So totally different scenario than a police report is that we don't collect information on people to the detail that the police do. They may have to go find Christopher Edwin Howe, who lives at wherever here. They have his address. There's date of birth. They may have to go find him at this address. In my case, I know who he is because he works for me. And if he doesn't, I still have enough information on him because he is somehow associated with my company that I can find him. I don't need to collect that information. The rest of the report actually is, in this one, is pretty good, but it's really wordy. And police reports tend to be there. This is a chronological report. On May 3rd, I did this, and you'll see it's on May 10th, I did this. I called and spoke to this person. And this is all in one narrative and not really appropriate for a business-type report. And I think the really telling thing here, after all of this work, by the way, on this particular case, and you see that the guy made lots of phone calls and interviews and things like that, the prosecutor's office decided not to in the end. He's still doing work down here. He goes, they will not pursue any charges due to the cemetery being a private entity. I guess this was some kind of a theft from a cemetery. I didn't read the entire case, but frankly, they just collect a lot of information that we would not normally collect. So people tend to say, okay, well, let me find a police report, or ex-cops say, I'm going to use one of my old police reports and do it this way, and they collect personally identifiable information. Bad thing to do as a security manager in a corporate security investigation. Don't collect that information. You already have it. So if we reach into that cupboard and the cupboard is bare and there's no security report form to grab, and we can't use something that our brethren in the police use, then what can we do? Well, let's start with our investigative plan. If you remember correctly, we wrote out an investigative plan with our what and our when and our how and who, all the questions, right? we can answer those questions and add to those statements so long as we can get it into some sort of organized shell. All of that investigative plan can become our investigative report. That's the key to it. So sometimes the simplest answer is just that, the simplest answer. For years, security investigators would go to Word and you would write up everything in Word. You didn't have a form. Word is always the default. You start with a blank page and you just start writing. Unfortunately, Word doesn't allow you to attach a lot of things like video clips, pictures, scans of documents. It becomes cumbersome. You really can't. So you need to have a way to put it together. I will tell you that this is so simple. If you've never used Microsoft OneNote, it has become the investigator's best friend because it is so simple to build an investigation in OneNote. Now, some of you are probably rolling your eyes saying, oh my gosh, we went all through this just to say that we're going to use a Microsoft product that's not specially built for investigations. The answer is yes, because it keeps everything organized in one place. So let's talk a little bit about using OneNote in the investigation. So this is Microsoft OneNote. And if you think you don't have OneNote, think again. Because when you go into Office 365, where you get your mail from, right, your SRU mail, go up to the corner to the little checker box and click on it, and you will find that you have access to all the Microsoft Office products, including OneNote. In this particular case, I put in a fictitious investigation, and I put in different categories. So down at the bottom here, let me get in here. You'll see it says section down on the bottom, and you just add the section, and you hit the plus. You can add a what, a when, a where, a who, a how, and a why. And I put a summary in. And my summary is, this investigative report relates to the matter of Smith, Joseph A., and opened on September 30th, right? Mr. Jones reported to the security office his vehicle had been vandalized. Jones reported that persons unknown had used red spray paint to write jerk across the passenger side door of his gray 2019 Corvette. Ouch. And the matter ended up being Smith because later on in the investigation, Smith became the subject. But again, this is the investigative report on this complaint. That's the summary. Now, I go to my what, and here's my what. On or about September 30th, persons unknown vandalized a Corvette owned by Jones. Reported Jones, someone sprayed jerk on the side of the car in paint. The company handbook states that vandalism is an offense, and malicious destruction of property is also a crime in Pennsylvania. I have my what. Now I can go to my when, right? And I put in my questions, my statements, my questions. This is my investigative report. Jones reported the incident at 3:40 on the 30th, right? To support this investigation, I must. Does this look familiar? This is indeed the statement, the questions, and where I'm going to get the information. To support this investigation on the what, I need to show that Jones' vehicle was present in Lot B, the when rather, on September 30th, right? Was it present? I have to be able to show that. So I'm going to get video footage of Lot B. I'm also going to get surveillance footage to see if his car moved on that day, to show that it was there all day. So here are the different questions I was going to ask, and I put them right there into different tabs. I now go to my where tab. Location. It's alleged that damage took place in Lot B. Okay. Supported, I must show that he parked in Lot B. Did he? He did. And in fact, in this case, there's a picture of Jones' Corvette right there, parked in Lot B. So I am able to attach, and in this case, I just plugged it right onto the screen here, but you can also attach files and video clips and investigation notes. If you take handwritten notes, you can scan them, take a picture of them, and attach them, and put them all under these simple tabs. And in the end, you can print the entire notebook. That becomes your entire investigative plan, or your investigative report. And the summary, which you just keep going back to and adding to. So when you discover things, just like that policeman did, he did his chronologically, and his was rather wordy, you just go ahead and put in a quick statement about what you found. I have confirmed that Jones was parked in Lot B on such and such a date, and that his vehicle did not move. See tab, when, where. That's all you have to do. Then if I want to see that, I go to those tabs, and then sure enough, I see the picture. So this is an easy way to organize your investigative files. I mean, when I've been using investigative canned software programs for decades. And when this came out and somebody showed me this, I was like, oh my God. The beauty of it is that it's always available. I mean, it's just so easy to work with. And so I'm going to tell you that if indeed you are not handed a canned investigative program, and 90% of you will not be handed one, then I strongly suggest you go to OneNote. And there's more reasons than just the ease and the intuitive nature that it has for investigative work. So to go on sounding like a commercial for OneNote, but there are others, right? But if you don't have one, OneNote's an available option that end users understand. Many people in a business setting are using programs like OneNote or OneNote, which is probably the most popular of this type of note-taking program. They're using this so they understand it. If I need to send this notebook to my employment lawyer, if I say, look, I've got the file on Jones' incident, I need to send it to you because we're going to interview Smith, and I think I've got him here. Just want you to look it over and tell me if there's any weak spots, because if not, I'm going to lower the boom in the interview. I can easily send this entire notebook to my employment lawyer in one swift move. Okay, it's protected by the company's internal firewalls because it's going internally. Or I can print up all the pages, individual pages, just the summary, or the entire notebook. And that's what makes this so easy and so intuitive. For the rest of this semester, we'll be using OneNote to start building our cases and to start taking notes. I strongly suggest that you learn how to use this particular program because it's not something that's going to go away and it's something that you're going to use. So we're going to continue to use it, and you may have an opportunity this week to do just that. So this week we split our time between finishing up on the investigative plan, which I find to be the most important thing you can do in an investigation, and then the investigative report with why it's not the same as a police report, right? So investigative plans should include a statement, not just go directly to questions. And some of you did that, and look, I'm not going to fault you for it, and if you did that, don't freak out. Everybody's grade is going to be fine on that because I think you really stepped up. If you made a decent effort on it, you're going to get your 5 points. Don't worry about that. But I think those who left out the statement part went right to the questions. I think that although the questions you asked were good ones, they may not have been focused enough because you really didn't make a statement as to what you have to prove. If you make that statement, your questions will be more direct, and you don't overreach like I could have, right? If I only wanted to know about violent incidents, within the last 5 years and stuff, I almost overreached and asked him about something that did not perhaps include him. So a corporate investigator's report is not the same as a police report. You know who your people are, so you don't have to have all that PII in there. Police need to have that because they may need to have to find you later. And getting more information about who you are, every little bit, your height, your weight, they may need to put an APB out on you, right? Or an arrest warrant out on you. And so they want as much information as possible. I can get that through other sources. That is one thing an employer has, is a lot of information on you, where you have lived, where you have worked, who you may have had on your medical plan over the time. So that's all connections that can be made that the police don't have. But I don't need to collect it. Somebody else is doing that. Somebody else is protecting it. Stay out of the business of collecting that information. An effective corporate investigation report is always organized. It has short, focused narratives, not the long, drag-out ones, and no conjecture. Absolutely no, I think they did it because of this. If you have to start the sentence with I think, then I think you should not put it in your report. Okay? It contains all the supporting artifacts and evidence to support your what, your when, your where, your who, your how, and your why. Right? If you make a comment in the why, which you're not required to do, right? We don't have to show motive in a corporate security investigation. But if you decide you want to put something in there because it strengthens the case and it was a basis for something else you did, then you need to have a piece of evidence to support that, right? You need to have an artifact or some evidence to support everything. So that's what makes your investigation airtight. You can summarize your investigation when you share it with others and not have to print out all those artifacts, right? So your case, if we put it in like OneNote, and I save files, and I save a video file, and it's a half-hour long. When I send that case to someone, I don't need to send that entire half-hour video unless that is something that they need to do their job. I can just send the summary. with a police investigation, normally when you see those, they carry around a file and it's about 10 pounds, right? There's no weight test for a corporate security investigation. Do it electronically, keep it short and sweet, and only send those artifacts that are necessary to the person if they're requested or if they need it to do their portion of the job, right? It can be summarized. That's why on that first summary sheet in OneNote, you just keep updating what you've done and that you've proved this and you've proven that. For more information, go to that tab. It's really just kind of almost a table of contents. I strongly suggest, if you don't have a reporting tool that is handed to you, an incident reporting system of some kind, that you use a tool that's familiar to the end user, right? Use one that's readily available. The canned products, the IRMs, the D3s, those specialty companies that will approach you at some point in your career and say, I got this cool incident reporting software and it does this and it tracks that and it gives you all kinds of graphs and bells and whistles. They are expensive. They require regular updates that you have to do because you're the only one in your company using it. So you've got to pay for them and you've got to sometimes do the installations on them, right? And they can also open you up to problems if you're trying to do a report and you have the latest version. It may not print out right? Because the print drivers are not correct. I mean, I've just run into so many problems with those. The readily available tools, the Microsoft Office tools, have become standard in the workplace. If you can use those, they really help you out because they make for good reporting and repository tools. They're being used for similar purposes across the board, and they will help you. I suggest OneNote. We're going to use that in this course. Others are using it a lot. It has really become a game changer for corporate investigators to use this product. I sound like I'm endorsing it, and I am in that regard. I don't own any Microsoft stock. I'm not making any money, and you don't have to buy it because the university's already done that for you here. But I really suggest you get good at that product because it will help you in not only investigations on the security side, but those of you who are doing cybersecurity, those of you who are doing safety. It's a pretty good tool for that as well. It was a bit tough for some, so this week is a little lighter. You earned that, a little bit of reprieve from all that writing. I know that we've just seen a survey taken about online classes, and students are concerned about the workload, and I get that. It's very easy to add extra work in an online environment. You feel like you need to add more. It just seems thin. Remember due dates. You know who you are. A number of people missed that Thursday thing. If there's a discussion, it's due on Thursday at 5 for the initial post, and the responses are due at midnight on Sunday. That is standard throughout the course, in all my courses, quite frankly. So I can't post that 5 o'clock Thursday in calendar automatically. I'm going to try to find a manual way to do that this week for my other class, but it's up to you to remember due dates. I always mention them in the lecture. I always mention them in the news item, and they are always on the discussion at the bottom. So you can't say you weren't told. Some of you got a little reprieve this week. Everybody gets one get out of jail free card in my world. Please don't ask for a second. And with that, piece of shaking my finger at you, everybody have a great week. If you have questions, I am here to help you. Text, email, call, send up a smoke signal, whatever. That's what I'm here for. That's why you pay me. So have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.